My name is Lino di Salvo. I'm animation supervisor at Walt Disney Animation Studios. Been there for about 12 years, um, and it's been my dream job since watching Pinocchio, and being able to work there is pretty awesome. I was on Tangled. I was a supervising animator. Basically, there were Mark Mitchell and myself. We were kind of overseeing sequences, and uh, in pre-production, we'd also drive certain characters. And the character I was involved with most was Flynn. So throughout the film, um, and in design, as far as facial expressions go, making sure there's continuity within the sequences, making sure Flynn's performance was real, it was believable. He had subtext. Um, that was the main goal for the film. Was each supervisor would drive these characters and watch them throughout the film and kind of maintain that they had character and they were entertaining and there was a through line through the sequences with them. I think the thing with Tangled that separated it from everything else was the directors Byron and Nathan. They really knew what they wanted, and they wanted to put a fresh spin on a story or characters that you think you would know. So they, with all the twists and turns and all the moments, the situations in the film that you'd get into and always be surprised, they had that in the plan as soon as they came on the film right from the beginning. There's so much appeal with the characters on screen, and they complement each other. So there are very few characters in the film that they're just they're just in the film for that scene or for that moment. If you notice, there's a through line with all the characters, and there's a payoff at some point, and their relationship matters. And for us in CG, doing a successful, not creepy, human style character was a huge challenge. We wanted to do something that looked like legacy characters, that had the appeal of the characters that you know from Disney, but in CG. So we took tons of time finessing brow shapes, mouth shapes, expressions, making the faces very organic and malleable. Um, it When you have guys like Glen Keane on the crew, and you have directors like we did, there's nowhere to go but up. They're so picky, and there were so many days where we didn't think the pickiness was gonna matter. But at the end of the day, you're watching shots. Months go by and you're in dailies, and you're like, holy cow, man, these characters are awesome. And animators are animating certain shots. That's raising the bar. Everyone's trying to meet that bar. More shots come out, everyone notices, and everyone keeps rising. Glen's doing draw overs, tweaking your poses, strengthening facial expressions. Um, it was really cool. It felt like all the stars were aligned. Everyone in the film was very collaborative. It felt like the main interest of the show was this film has to look awesome, and the acting has to be real. And when you watch the characters now, I think they totally stand up. So we're pretty proud about that. The cool thing with having a show where you have Byron Howard, who used to animate, Nathan Greno, who was head of story on other films, and Glen Keane in the room to keep the acting honest and appealing. Every daily session was about context and continuity. It was about where are the characters coming from, where are they going, and then what is the shot about. If it's a shot where a character is sad, you have to get down to those basic ideas of the shot has to be about the character being sad, and that appeal of how do you do it without being cliche? How does the character do it with subtext? How do you have a character say no but mean yes? And it's all those little tiny subtexts where a character's nodding yes, but they don't mean it. And those are the little tiny cherries that in animation, especially on Tangled, I'm really proud that we were able to do, because it's super tough. And the room would always keep you honest. Being in dailies and putting up your shot, you know right away the energy in the room if your shot wasn't working, and everybody would pile on, which is great. It hurt, but everybody would keep you honest. You show a blocking pass, you think it'd be pretty good. I'm feeling pretty good about this. No. Everyone goes in there, piles on. Glen will do his draw overs. Nathan would get up and he'd act out the Flynn parts. And Byron would call you out on the honesty of the character and if it's not really working. So there were so many firewalls that you couldn't bullshit your way through a shot. It had to be honest. And at the end of the day, when you watch the film, I feel like there are so many sequences where you're watching the character's eyes. That means we did our job. You're not floating around and noticing animation. You're watching the characters' faces and you're watching their eyes and you're watching the subtext again. You're watching the thinking, and you just kind of locked onto them for these shots, these emotional shots, and it's pretty cool. So Glen's sense of appeal is so sophisticated that for instance, we'd show a shot where, let's say, Flynn was trying to be kind of cool, and he'd be half lidded, and we'd have a pose where it looked pretty strong. Glen would go in there and draw these line of action, tweak the head, move the hips, drop the head, and then all of a sudden, just with those little tiny tweaks, you'd have a character that was just so much more appealing. And the cool thing is that as the film went on, Glen didn't have to do all these draw overs every daily session. If you were in the room and you saw the trend of what Glen was doing, you put that in your toolbox. You'd go away, and when you'd work on another shot, you'd bring it. And chances are Glen wouldn't do that draw over. So it wasn't like he was continually drawing on over the shots. We kind of embraced those little tiny moments of what he was showing us, and then we were using that to our advantage. I think what makes Flynn appealing and kind of stand out from the rest is that his facial expressions, they were all based on movement and how would he look if he tilted his head, and we designed shapes around the dynamic qualities of his body. So for instance, Jin Kim, one of our character designers who would work along with Glen, they would give us drawings of Flynn in these situations, and they were all hand-drawn sheets of paper with Flynn in different poses, different extremes. So we wanted to build off of non-static poses. We wanted to see how are the traditional guys, how they drawing him. And we want to use those lines to describe Flynn's face. So for instance, doing Flynn's brows and designing his brows and having art direction in his brows. There was something that we designed where if you took his brows down and we were designing a furrow shape, that shape would be designed so whenever the controls were moved, you dial in art direction. And that was for all over his face. You move a corner, it dials in art directed cheek. You move the jaw around, and it's going to affect everything around his lower part of his face. Getting malleability in his face was really important so he didn't look static. I think it was mostly about keeping the appeal on his face whenever you're moving a control. Because the characters in CG, they could easily go off model. And I think it was really important for us that no matter how we have to shoot Flynn in the shot, that we find an appealing side of his face. So designing all those kind of facial calisthenics and doing a facial calisthenic where he's kind of turned 3/4 and moving this side of his face, going back in, doing iterations, adjusting the weighting, and then doing it again for if he's looking under his brows and doing brow calisthenics and what's kind of missing. And we just did that in all quadrants of his face. So when you watch Flynn's dialogue, I think what's cool about it is it's not cartoony and he doesn't have like a water balloon head, but his cranium is stiff and his bottom part of his face is malleable. And I think that's what helps add to the appeal of the characters.